Welcome to the Existential Edge podcast, presented by the United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship. How is entrepreneurship transforming university environments? What are its most compelling lessons? How can an entrepreneurship program make maximum impact on its ecosystem and change the lives of students and others in the process? Join Patrick J. Murphy, Goodrich Endowed Chair, Professor, and Director of the Entrepreneurship Program at the University of Alabama at Birmingham as he hosts leading entrepreneurs from across the country and beyond for provocative and insightful discussions of these and other questions.
Welcome, everybody, to the Existential podcast. I am Patrick J. Murphy, Goodrich Chair of Entrepreneurship at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, recording from Innovation Depot, Birmingham, Alabama's flagship entrepreneurship co-working space. This is a podcast for entrepreneurship educators where we meet successful entrepreneurs from around the United States and from other countries and talk to them about their background and their beliefs. We talk to them about their entrepreneurial ventures, and then we get their insights into entrepreneurship education. And today we have a Chicago-based entrepreneur, Rajiv Nathan. We're going to get to know him really well. We're going to talk about his entrepreneurial ventures, and we're going to get his insights into entrepreneurship education. There will be some links and other things that will drop into the description, anything that Raj might want to share with our listening audience. So before we get into it, Raj, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Do I get to call you Patrick, or do I just call you Professor Murphy?
You can call me Patrick now. You've more than earned it.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited. I've had you as a guest on my show a couple of times in the past, so it's cool to be on the other side of the microphone now.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it, and I think the audience is in for a real treat. So, Raj, if I could, I'd like to go ahead and get into the conversation where we find it really useful as educators and researchers and people who teach others to get to know the whole person. And so we're going to get your views on entrepreneurship education ultimately here. But in order to kind of feel where all that's coming from, tell us a little bit about who you are. And you can go way back if you want, but we want to know what makes you different, what makes you you. Talk about your values, just your upbringing, anything you'd like to share with the audience to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, so I think the best answer I can give for who am I is like, what's my belief system, I guess. And my fundamental belief about the world, and quite honestly, the reason I think I was put on this earth was this baseline sort of principle that everyone deserves to express themselves. So I am hardwired in this deep-rooted belief of the power of expression. And everything that I've ever really done professionally or even really cared about, even if it was personally, has all been in the name, when I think about it, has all been in the name of expression. And so I've found over time that the chariot or the vehicle that I ride, to fulfill that expression mission has always been some form of storytelling. Or at least that's how I rationalize it in my, maybe outwardly it doesn't look like it's storytelling. But in my head, I look at it through the lens of story, and I kind of treat myself as such, as the purveyor, the narrator, the teller of the story. And that's kind of shaped, not kind of, it really has shaped a lot of my decision making over the years, even at a subconscious level before I knew that was the thing. That was shaping my decision making before I knew it, and now it very much is where I make a lot of decisions from. And when I think about why might that be the case? Why do I feel that's what I was hardwired for? I think it has a lot to do with growing up as a first generation American, living this dual identity, where you have, and I'm Indian American, which is right? There's a hyphen in there, right? So I play the role of Indian, I play the role of American, and I think that that life experience has shaped a lot of my perspectives, a lot of my beliefs, a lot of my actions, etc. Especially it wasn't like I was it's not like I grew up Indian American, but in a predominantly Indian neighborhood either. It was a predominantly white neighborhood. So I think constantly having to navigate and figure out and ask this question to myself, whether I was aware of it or not, I was always having to ask myself, well, who am I? And so I think really because of that life experience I had early on, it's what's shaped a lot of this worldview that I have now.
So your identity shaped your worldview. Maybe you felt a need to express across certain boundaries that other people didn't necessarily have to express or translate across. But what are some of the early things you did? Like, were there TV shows or things you learned in school early on, or family influences? What are some really concrete influences that instilled that value for expression in you?
So there are a couple of things, like entertainment wise, that definitely directly influence what I do now and where I get a lot of this mindset from. And I think, from knowing me, like, pro wrestling has been a huge part of like my life since I was a kid. And I look at that as like, what bigger mode of expression is there than like these larger than life characters playing these larger than life roles in order to just like get a pop from the audience. So that, I know, like, that to me, like I gravitated to that very early on. I think because I was like, okay, there's something here around like getting a point across. And, I knew it was scripted even from the start, even when I was a kid, but I was like, but there's some draw to this. I remember even like playing like sports video games as a kid. I would have my own announcers going on in my head separate from what the game was producing, because I was like, trying to craft my own like narrative of this whole game, right? So those were definitely things that were going on in my mind. And I even would say like, those are the tangible things you could point to. I think there's a lot of other like more like deeper rooted, more intangibles, I guess, that a lot of this mindset was produced out of. And I think it's a lot of like the crap I had to endure through certain parts of my life, through different influences, I guess, and having to navigate like relationships. So growing up in a predominantly white community, you're actually constantly looked at as like the other, even when you're like fully brought into the fold. And I don't mean to say everyone, but enough people that I knew who were, my friends, people I was close with, it wasn't necessarily the same. We weren't necessarily on the same level, I guess, because there was a skin color and like a religion difference. And again, it's not stuff that I knew at the time, but I can look at it today and say that was directly influential to this belief system, this idea of people being able to express themselves, because I have experienced moments in my life where I felt like I couldn't be me. I had to fulfill a certain role, or I had to play a certain part in order to fit whatever the expectation was.
We've talked on this show quite a bit with entrepreneurs who have some sort of aspect of who they are that makes them different from others. And without giving that up, without selling out, but keeping and preserving the integrity of that difference, they have nonetheless developed life strategies for surviving and thriving despite the fact that they're different. And it sounds to me like your celebration of the act of expressing oneself and influencing others might be related to the identity issues that you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's sometimes when I do like keynote talks, sometimes I'll bring up an example that again wasn't something I knew at the time, but in retrospect, I look back and I say that was a pivotal moment. I think there's something at a deep level in me that says, well, I don't want people to have to feel that way. And the example that I'll give is, for me, the scariest day of my life was actually September 12th, 2001. So the day after 9/11, because we all like went back to school that day after having seen, 12 hours of news coverage the day before. And, I got to school that day and it was almost like everyone I knew had turned on me, or like my close friends had turned on me, because now there was this clear, we didn't know much at that point about what happened, but we knew enough to know, hey, people who look a certain way did this thing to Americans. And so I became lumped as part of that by, enough people. So when I got to school that day, the way it was set up was like before the bell rings in the morning, all the students just like line up outside of the school. And so, generally whenever your bus arrives, you just go like find wherever your friends are standing and you go stand in the line near them. And so that's what I did. And one of my close friends at the time, saw me approaching, and he said, I swear to God, if you wore a rag on your head or if you were Islamic, I'd drop your ass right here, right now.
Oh, man.
And I was, 12 years old at the time, 13 years old maybe. And I remember in that moment, it was almost like out of a movie, because like this like swell of like people formed this like semicircle around to be like, what's going to happen here? Mm. And I had to react in that moment. And I didn't have a ton of time to think about it, because I know people are watching. I know, he's just said this to me. And I'm at the same time, I'm also like, but this is also my friend, right? And I'm trying to not like kill a friendship at the same time, regardless of what was just said to me. So all I could muster in that moment was to like shake his hand and say like, yeah, right on. Like totally, like I would do the same thing. It's not what I agreed with. It's like all I could muster in that moment. Mm. And so, to your question, which was like, do you think the expression stuff now is related to like some of the identity challenges of before? A lot of me, when I look at the work that I do now, probably the underlying like root of a lot of it is a voice in me saying, well, I never want anyone to feel the way I had to feel that on that day.
That is a vivid example. And that's some friend. So are you still friends with him? Are you still friends with him today?
Was friends through high school and, a couple of years into college. And then we kind of just like drifted from there. But, it's almost like the story should go. I never talked to him again after that day, but it didn't. It was like, it was, I think the process, and especially at that age when all you're trying to do is just be accepted and fit in, and everyone's going through puberty. So everyone's just like mean to each other. You just like, you write it off as whatever and you keep going. But I think that and moments like that are what had me like internalize certain like identity beliefs over a course of several years that it took a decent amount of time to unravel from and be able to like put myself out there in a certain way and be confident and comfortable in it and know like what I don't want to have to conform back to.
One of the things that we as entrepreneurship educators spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to teach most effectively is resilience. And it's an important part of the entrepreneurial mindset to be strong in the face of uncertainty or even adverse circumstances. And in your story here, I clearly, right, you had to have a certain kind of strength and strong sense of who you are and ability to deal with those things around you, just not as an entrepreneur, but as a person. We're going to get into your entrepreneurial ventures here in a minute. And I got to tell everybody, Raj is doing some incredible things as an entrepreneur. He has a huge audience and he has a number of really cool projects. But before we get into that, Raj, what is it about you, your character, or your personality that enabled you not to shrink away from the hostile social forces around you? Where did you find strength to grow in the midst of those sorts of circumstances?
I think, because there was there was a several year period during that like growing up phase where I felt like I had to hide a portion of myself at all times, whether it was culturally or whether it was like just through like interests, right? Like I started rapping in high school and that was not received well by most of my friends because they said, oh, literally what they said was, you're not Black, you can't rap. Which, you know, that's its whole other like mixed bag of stuff we could talk about. But, you know, so what did I have to do? I would like write these things in my room and like hide the notebook. So if I were any friends over, no one would find it, that kind of thing. There was always this like hint of like, I'm doing it, but not really, which even as I got a little bit older, like through college, it took a few years to like feel comfortable and confident saying, I rap, I'm a rapper, you know, versus like, yeah, no, there's like this thing I kind of do sometimes. Don't ask me about it. Right. And I think, you know, again, it's not like I didn't necessarily like have like the tolerance or like the switch to flip at the time. I think what started to change where you know, you talk about like that word, like the resilience and everything. And I'll tell you like today, what I know to be true and what I'll tell others is you really have to be like, I think if you want to be successful in the sense of like happy with yourself, you know, material gain can be part of that as well, but truly being happy with who you are, you have to be willing to be unrelentlessly yourself. And that means, you know, not having to necessarily like code switch regarding, depending on the room you're in. And I don't mean like, you know, walk into like a formal event wearing like a tank top and like shorts. That's not what I mean. But so many people that I see feel like they can't actually talk about the things they're interested in because they don't know if someone else is going to be interested in that too. And I'm like, well, how are you going to know unless you talk about it? Right? You're just going to hope that somehow you find yourselves online. Otherwise, you're like, oh, you like this thing too? You like this thing too? Yeah, let's be friends over that, right? So, you know, when I present myself in whatever room I'm in, and I don't necessarily mean as the presenter, but when I'm talking with people, when I'm meeting people, I don't really feel like I need to like hold back on what I'm interested in or what I like or what I'm involved in. And that's not to say when they meet me, I say, hi, I'm Raj, here's everything that I do, right? It's just more so that it's not hard for me now to be like, oh, that actually reminds me of this thing that I really like that, you know, talks about that as well. Right? I don't have that like fear of, are they going to think it's weird or not? I think everyone should strive to be weird, in fact, because that's what makes the world interesting. And to be unrelentlessly yourself, I think the process for me probably started a little less than a decade ago. And it really started to happen when I changed who my immediate like surroundings were or who my immediate circle was. And I didn't realize, I truly did not realize until I started to make these changes that there actually is like a level of relationship you can have with people or friendship you can have with people that isn't predicated on just who can make fun of each other the best or who has like the funniest like rip on someone. Like, you know, a couple of my friends from DePaul, where you know, that's how we know each other because he used to teach there. A couple of my friends from DePaul who I wasn't like super close with, but we were friends. They ended up becoming my roommates a couple of years after college. And I remember like telling them something that I was about to do that was interesting. And their response was like only support. And I remember thinking, I was like, wait a second. Like I was bracing for like oh, that sounds dumb or whatever. And it wasn't that. And it was just a fully, it was like how can we be there? You know, like how can we support you? Mm-hmm. And that was a totally different level of like, again, of friendship that I just genuinely did not know existed until that point. So that's what started to change things. And then as I started to do entrepreneurial things, I just started to surround myself with other people doing entrepreneurial things. So, when you have the off the beaten path idea, there's people who want to talk through it with you. When you have the day that's terrible, you have other people who have also experienced or are experiencing terrible days, and vice versa, the great stuff as well. So I think, speaking from experience, I think a lot of people never get out of that like rut of, well, the people that I have surrounded myself with are the people I must forever surround myself with. And I just don't think that's true at all. I think, I think it's great to have lifelong friends, and I admire the people who do. And I have many, I do have some friends who I've had for life who have been amazing. I don't want to discount that, but I also think certain people come into your life at certain times for certain reasons. And sometimes those reasons have a certain expiration date on them. And it's okay if that happens and you make room for someone or something new.
These are great insights, Raj. I really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this section of the show and take a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to learn all about Raj's entrepreneurial ventures and how maybe we'll get him to talk about rap a little bit. We'll get him to talk about the different projects that he's worked on and how he's used his past experiences to become a successful entrepreneur in the city of Chicago with a national and an international audience when we come back on the Existential Edge podcast.